Hi, everyone, and hi, Cindy. Thank you for agreeing to be with me today.
Thank you for having me, Temora.
Now, everyone, I have something to read to you. I have wanted for some time to coordinate a conversation with people who already have a fairly informed grasp regarding Agenda 2030, feel comfortable sharing with people who don't know what's going on. The problem has been that I'm not a terribly good interviewer. Give me time and practice and watch me get worse. And also, you can't control what people say, which is annoying, but worth fighting for. So I have invited Cindy and all of you here today to listen to me reading about how I came to understand what's going on, in the hopes that it in some way resonates with other people because it is at the very least authentic. I do apologise. Feel free to cancel me anytime, erase me entirely from history and tear down all the statues. Luckily, Cindy has agreed to redeem the video by answering a set of preconceived questions at the end, which, in order not to frighten her into overthinking, I haven't actually read to her. Fun for all the family. So I'm going to start where I started, not because it's the best place to start. I don't know where that is. Well, I do. It's a long way back in history. And luckily for you, I still haven't recouped all my educational losses. So we're going to start with the early days of the pandemic and the newspaper and television reporting. I'm not a genius, but I am a would-be journalist. And that being the case, I can tell you that what I'm reading you here now is effectively editorial. It's an opinion piece, not journalism in its purest sense. Authentic journalism is about presenting all the facts in a non-biased manner, which allows other people to access the bigger picture, the context, the most important detail, the for and against, or pros and cons, and that's it. It's not a means of psychological warfare, which is my perception of what has become of this one-time worthy profession. Journalism is not about telling people what to think. Journalism is about telling people what is and letting them decide what they think. So when the media started presenting information about COVID deaths without contextualizing the data, I was both perplexed and annoyed. If you're going to say how many people have died of COVID today, say anywhere between 2 and 200, why aren't you also presenting the context, which is that, for instance, in the UK, we have a population of over 68 million, as well as offering a comparative factor, like how many people have died today of flu and pneumonia. The total deaths, say, in 2015 were 528,507, which is an average of 1,451 per day. Now, it doesn't happen like that because it is seasonal, so there are more deaths per day in the winter and fewer at other times of the year, but that gives you some idea regarding the mortality of a comparative illness. That would have been journalism. Now we have an excess mortality over and above the pre-COVID 5-yearly average of more than 1,000 deaths per week in the UK. 1,000 deaths per week. But no one is reporting on that. Far less a daily tally with advice regarding how climate change, which is entirely your fault, is causing heart attacks in athletes and young people, and how this can be avoided by ignoring the latest research out of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which indicates that the Earth has been warming for the past 10,000 years, and no physical forces could have been enough to overwhelm the trend. The context being that the Earth goes through cycles of warming and cooling, interglacial periods and glacial periods on roughly 100,000 year cycles. So I came to the table over a despairing lack of journalistic integrity, which ushered in the most bizarre push to vaccinate the entire Western world and all of our children with a vaccine that was manufactured in 6 months, as compared to the average development time of 8 to 12 years. And that doesn't include mass production and distribution, alongside the fact that the manufacturers were being given total indemnity from prosecution, which meant no compensation, even in the case of the accepted percentage of injury caused by all vaccines, collateral damage in the name of humanity. There was also the pressure to wear masks, despite 20 years of gold standard randomized controlled trials having concluded that at best they do nothing and at worst they do harm. They certainly harmed a generation of young children who were deprived of facial expression recognition learning, interaction with other children, and exposed to far more television than ever before. But that's okay, because there was a lot of money to be made, lives to be saved, and environmental harm to be ignored by producing cheap plastic PPE. I've left out the bit where I hopelessly tried to support through YouTube videos and a blog one of the earliest vaccine injury victims, a lady from New Orleans called Angelia Gibson DeSalle, even writing to the mainstream media and making a video appeal to Mr. Borla, the CEO of Pfizer, on her behalf. I know, adorable, wasn't I? But at that point, I still believed that what must be happening was that, for reasons as yet unknown to me, people had become very frightened of what was essentially another strain of flu, and others, driven by greed, were capitalizing on the panic ad hoc. I had come across a few conspiracy theorists by now, aka people who knew more than me, but I dismissed most of what they were saying because I'm not a genius, and I was finding it hard to adjust to the idea of a wholesale agenda to do harm and affect control. At this point, I started trying to follow the PPE money, which led me to watch a documentary by a Dutch producer called Monopoly, Who Owns the World. And if you haven't seen it, then it is well worth your time. Personally, I would recommend that you try and find the first version. There is a second one, which is arguably more polished, but I think it's lost a certain je ne sais quoi. This illustrated for me that all of the companies in the world, even the ones that I thought were competing brands, are actually owned. If you trace back their stocks and shares to the absolute origin, they're owned by exactly the same people. So Pepsi and Coca-Cola are not competitors. They're both owned by the people who are behind the Vanguard Group, an investment management company. Now, I can't tell you exactly who these people are. I could probably make now an educated guess, but the point is that almost everything that you own and everything that is being advertised to you is making money for the same small group of people, and they have a kind of wealth that sets them so far apart that it would actually be very difficult for them to empathize with ordinary people, because they have absolutely no experience of living in the way that ordinary people do. I find it useful, although far from flawless, in trying to understand their perspective, to draw a parallel between ourselves and the people in African villages and slums. Even if we see them on the periphery of our lives through television or travel, and we care about them to any degree, we don't do anything significant to help them, because they are a world apart from our reality. So even if any of these incredibly rich people felt any true benevolence towards us, it would manifest in approximately the same way. But they really don't feel benevolent towards us, although they may think that they do, in the same way that a psychopath thinks that if their captor does everything that they say, that person will actually be happier because the psychopath knows best. This documentary also helped me to understand the degree to which the mainstream media is controlled. I mean, I had seen it deteriorate over the years, with even the broadsheets succumbing to clickbaitism, but I didn't realize that presenters and anchors all around the globe were literally reading from the same script, using exactly the same words, which goes against every fiber of authentic journalism in the mixed metaphor book. And this was the point at which I started to come across the knowledge that would answer the question that had been bothering me from the beginning. Why? Why was all of this happening? Event 201 was an early eye-opener, a simulation event run by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation of a deadly flu-like strain suddenly afflicting the world and how it should be mass managed. This took place in New York in October 2019. A lecture given by a Belgian politician at Chatham House regarding how he had hyped up the fear associated with swine flu in order to drive a vaccination drive was another wake-up call. I later learned that the vaccine was pulled, this particular one associated with swine flu, because too many people had developed narcolepsy. And interacting with the legal team who fought and won the UK-based compensation claim was another steep learning curve. And I think it was just about this point that the Canadian truckers drove over the horizon to the tune of Indiana Jones the Indiana Jones theme song, in my house anyway. to try and preserve the basic human right of the Canadian people to bodily autonomy. Yes, that really did happen. And I was able to learn and watch the peaceful protest that they staged in Ottawa, learn about and watch the peaceful protest that they staged in Ottawa via Facebook live streams, some of which were organized by the lead truckers, advocating for calm in the face of provocation at all times, others of which were hosted by real life individuals on the ground. As well as being in messenger contact with one of the drivers, Cara Elizabeth Grimmer, who was parked in the center of the city. All of which gave me access to what was actually happening and enabled me to compare and contrast it with the mainstream media portrayal. The dichotomy between the actuality of bouncy castles, ice hockey games in the street, and mass prayers in the city square versus the hardline, right-wing, fascist, racist, misogynistic menace to society that was being mass disseminated was utterly bizarre. It was also both sort of surreal and appalling. I watched as Trudeau invoked the Emergency War Act to disband his own people, bringing in UN forces to threaten them with arrest and literally form a central perimeter and step by step, with the threat of batons and loaded weapons if the protesters didn't retreat, push them out of their capital city. The Canadian police force wasn't used because it was feared that they were vulnerable to empathy. One person was trampled by a police horse and died. And it was through this extraordinary window of cross-continental comradeship and connections that I met Cindy Niles, an Australian resistor who gave me the remaining piece of the puzzle, the answer to my question about why all of this was happening. I was duly disappointed to discover that the Canadian trucker protest was likely seeded by the World Economic Forum or the UN, so that a demonstration of absolute power over dissent could be broadcast to the entire Western world. But this turned out to be the least of my disappointments, as I was slowly disabused of almost everything that I had ever thought that I understood. I liked this woman, primarily through Cindy Niles, but also through Julianne Romanello and many other fine minds and researchers. I was finally properly introduced to a concept that had been lurking in the background for some months, but that I had been hoping to circumvent research-wise, because, to be brutally honest, I thought it would be boring. And because I believe in practicing what you preach, which in my case is that it's okay to change your mind in the face of credible new information, Cindy Niles is here to tell you how much of my mind I had to change. So, Cindy, in keeping with the format so far and with your help, I am hoping to try and take people through a series of information sort of links that may help people to make sense of this dystopia. Hi, I can see you again. So my first question for you is, what is Agenda 2030 and what role did COVID play?
I'm so glad you started with the easy question. What is Agenda 2030? It's a long-running agenda. I don't think it's as new as we often portray it to be. The people that own the resources of the world, who have appropriated those resources to themselves, because God did not bestow the petrol, the oil, the minerals in the ground to anybody. One must take those things. One must build an army and take them. So I don't think anybody would deny that that was already happening. And, you know, what's Agenda 2030? Agenda 2030 is very much a levelling up of the control of those resources. If I had to sum it up in just, you know, one sentence, which I won't, of course, but that's where I would sort of land, that technology, having improved, having all these innovations, simply means that they can appropriate those resources in a more complex way, in a different way, in a more comprehensive way. So that's why it's always good to refer.
Your connection
that
is
Agenda 20.
up. Cindy, sorry, can you repeat that? Your connection is playing up, so that's why it's always good to start.
Okay. Can you tell me what you last heard?
So you were saying the sentence, that's why it's always good to start, and I think yep.
Right. Okay, so that's why it's always good to reference the other terms that Agenda 30 comes with. So Agenda 2030 or Agenda 30 simply refers to the milestone of 2030, the decade. Prior to that, it was called Agenda 21, and it still is referenced as that, meaning the agenda for the 21st century, which gives us the proper sort of positioning. It gives us context in the landscape that this is actually a very long-term plan with steps along the way. So another one of the terms that's used to refer to Agenda 2030 is the fourth industrial revolution. And I think that one really sort of hits the nail on the head because it highlights how much technology is a component in what is happening to our lives now, because all of the prior industrial revolutions were about machinery, and they were always about scaling. So scaling up production through the use of machinery, which eventually, through the evolution of industrialization, became automation. And so we were at a place or at a point in time where this machinery and this automation, this technology, made it possible that pretty much most of the world's goods were being produced in one country. It's not a secret that China has a very large population, but to be making everything for the entire world, and I talk in generalizations, of course there are exceptions, is quite phenomenal. If we go back, 100, 200 years or 150 years, your kitchen table had to be made quite locally because who was going to carry it? It was very heavy. It couldn't come from too far away, but we got to a point where furniture designed in Sweden, made with parts from all over the world, manufactured in China, and then shipped out again to every corner of the earth. So this is the process of industrialization, automation, and machination, and all of that. And we get to the fourth industrial revolution, where we're kind of at the cusp now of, well, we've automated everything we can automate, but have we? No, because now we can pretty much automate humanity. And this is stretching into that 100-year plan that I referred to earlier. So, what is Agenda 2030? Going back again now, it is primarily an economic plan which appropriates not just the resources we have come to know, which are oil and gold and titanium and cobalt and all those things. Now we're wanting to monetize, manage. There's another M word. Manage, monetize, and something else beginning with M. Everything on the planet, including the natural resources, including the oxygen in the air, the carbon in the air, the droplets of water that get filtered through the mountain. So it's an upscaling. Another way of seeing it, another term we can use would be globalization 4.0. And so it's a whole system. It's very much predicated on the economy, because the economy is what drives our interactions and pretty much everything that we do. So I know that sounds very cold, and it sounds like a discrete aspect of life, the economy. But if we stop thinking of, just our immediate sort of selves, and because as an individual, my life isn't the economy, that doesn't make much sense. But in fact, getting onto having this computer that I'm using now, that I'm talking to you, that I have an account online, all these are actually economic transactions that I've made. We have made a contract. There's a little contract in here between us. I mean, we only pushed a few buttons and, we're just talking to each other. But the fact of the matter is that these are all electronic and economic transactions. Everything I do, whether it's popping out to buy bread or buy chicken feed or attend a course or do a job, get paid for a job, pay somebody to do a job, pay the rent, pay the bills, everything is very much an economic transaction. So when we start there and we see that we're reinventing the wheel here, we're changing the economy. We're moving from money and energy in the sense of petrol and power and gas and things. We're moving into a carbon credit economy. And so another term they use is the reset, the Great Reset. So if one would listen to Klaus Schwab, who has become, not the notorious sort of poster boy of the World Economic Forum and this Great Reset, he talks about reimagining and redeveloping and rethinking, repurposing, reimagining, redeveloping. Maybe I'm repeating myself with the REs, but when you start doing that with an economy, it actually kind of fans out into reimagining the healthcare system, reimagining education, reimagining work, reimagining the transport, reimagining food systems, and that's a big one. So what is Agenda 2030? Well, so the same players pretty much that already owned the resources that our old economy was founded upon decided, well, we kind of want a little bit more of the planet. Let's not just, the oil, we've got that. We've got our armies looking after that. Well, let's go for the water. Let's go for the fresh water, and let's also limit people's ability to consume food, energy, and all sorts of things. So, and that won't be based on how much money you can make in a job. We're talking about a new game. I mean, you referenced Monopoly earlier on. It's kind of like they're taking that board game away from us now. It's the one we knew. It wasn't fair and it wasn't great by any stretch of the imagination, but it's the one we understood, that if you toil and work hard enough, and some people, get by in life with one job and one career, and other people need to have 4 jobs, and still they struggle, but it's what we knew. Now they've taken away that monopoly board and they're presenting us a totally new game board, which is not so much about our labor. And that is because the machines can do our labor now. Machines have been learning human labor for a long time. I made a post the other day, which included a screenshot that a friend had sent me. And it was just an automated service thing. It was actually the UK Telecom. I don't know exactly what they're called. And at the bottom it said, our phone calls may be used, monitored and recorded for training purposes. And there was a little flashbulb moment there where I realized, oh, all these years I thought they were, using those recordings to train their employees or new employees, when in fact they've been training the machines all this time. And that's why now we talk to bots and robots when we need service. And that's how they know, because we're talking about maybe at least 20 years, because I used to work in a call center. I worked in a call center when I was 20. And I remember telling my customers that the phone calls were being monitored and recorded, and was that okay? So that's a long time that's been happening. So getting back to, because the machines now can do human labor. Where was I? Because our labor isn't needed anymore, they need to find other ways to continue to control the game board, because it's like a game to them. Maybe, we think differently. We think, this is my life and this is, this is it. And, whether you believe in a next life or a reincarnation or your spirit going somewhere else, we all prize what we have, this life. We see it as finite. We take it very seriously. A lot of people say don't take it so seriously, but that's very hard to do. I think it's almost antithetical to a human to think, oh, I'm not going to take my life seriously. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm moving in all directions now in tangents.
No, I think it's good because it gives a holistic picture. I asked a very big question. I'm going to ask you to move on to what COVID has had, what part did COVID play? Why, what's the link?
Well, if people at tertiary institutions, if the children in the primary schools, if the doctors and the nurses and the patients in the hospitals, if the transport system, if the farmers, if the people working in corporate jobs in offices, the people playing sports, the people who are amusing themselves, going to amusement venues, entertainment venues, the arts. If we were to reimagine and reinvent and redevelop or rethink all of those places, all of those institutions, just because, like if employers said, employees, you must go home now, and children, you will study from home now on a screen, and to entertainers and their crowds, well, you'll watch it through virtually, sitting in the comfort of your home. People might not have liked this. They may have, it's very, very likely that people would have said, no, nah, I prefer to do it in person. I prefer to go to my school and hang out with my friends, and I much prefer to have my doctor there in person, taking my blood pressure for me and feeling my glands. I much prefer the person, the teller, at the checkout to scan my stuff for me and put them in a bag and, say hello. And so COVID was, it was the disruptor of disruptors. Now, disruptor and disruption is a term used in the literature and in magazines and the newspapers to describe how technology is shaking things up. For instance, the self-checkout, that is disruptive. It's, because you need to change your habits. People will lose their jobs. It's disruptive. So they needed an excuse, something so big, something that would draw so much attention so that people would relegate their work and their normal habits, their everyday habits, everything that they knew, it would be shifted and put in the background and on the shelf because of the immediacy of having to survive something that was going to kill you, right? For no other reason would people have found it acceptable to be told they have to be home inside their houses by 8 p.m. because otherwise police that are patrolling the streets they would have confrontation with the law. There is nothing else in the world, I think, that would have put people in that predicament and made it okay to say you can't travel more than 5 kilometers from your home for months on end. There was just no way of doing this. There was no way of having people agree to watch a concert online or to cancel their holidays or to not make plans for holidays. Only a mortal threat could have done that, and an invisible mortal threat that you can't see, you can't verify, you can't validate. How many of us can, outside of being a virologist or an epidemiologist? And even still, they picked something new, something novel that nobody had experience in. So nobody knew, nobody could concretely and with conviction say, oh, I know exactly what this COVID is. And these, this is your risk. It was basically they just threw something at us and said it's going to kill you. And well, it was up to each individual to deal with that idea and try to live through it. And the best way to do that would be to follow orders, they said put a mask on and it will help, and stay away from people. It'll help you, survive and live. Only under that circumstance would you not go and hug your mother. Only under that circumstance would you not celebrate your children's birthday. Because doing so might wipe you all out. So, and at the same time, all the mandates and policies that came about, that were planned and organized for COVID were very much training for the fourth industrial revolution, meaning how life will be further down the track. And it was very much a shock and awe kind of situation. Like, you know, the harder it is the first time, like the more shocking it is, the bigger it is, then, and we've never had this kind of experience, right? Not in Australia, that's for sure, not in Melbourne. And because we have no frame of reference, absolutely no frame of reference, you know, you sort of make it up as you go along. You follow what other people are doing because, well, that's got to be the right thing to do, doing what everybody else is doing. And, you know, when they lighten up, we had a very hard few years here, and, you know, think things lightened up a bit. And I expect that not all of the fourth industrial revolution is going to be so hard. Like, they gave us the really hard tests at the beginning, put a lot of pressure on us. And I think after that, all the other disruptions will always pale in comparison to getting locked down. Like, this is simultaneous, you know, like getting locked down, getting a curfew, having to wear a mask, having to social distance, not being able to spend cash, testing like maniacs, you know, testing for the saliva. We even had, you know, the forehead, you know, temperature testing to walk into a shop. After that, everything will be pretty easy. You know, when they say, look, all you need to do is QR code, like, that's it. That's all you need to do. By comparison to what people had to do, well, it's going to be plain sailing. And if anyone rears their head and says, oh, I don't like this QR coding, I don't want to be tracked and traced, people will reflect back on how things were at the beginning and how really they struggled, how they were suffocated by rules. And it will be trivial to them that there's anyone going, oh, I don't like this invasion of privacy.
That's great. I'm going to ask you then, because this is kind of how my learning went. I was then introduced to smart cities. So for other people who haven't been introduced to smart cities, could you explain a little bit about what a smart city is and how people are going to come to live in them?
So
another big question.
Yeah, another little question. Okay, so smart cities, which then become cognitive cities.
Well,
and in some places they're calling them intelligent cities. I think in Europe, just, you know, so we make sure that, because we're all on the one program here. This is it's about centralizing control. That's what automation is. So automation is very much about scaling and centralizing. And we've seen the centralization through the merging. It's very easy to see it in retail companies, you know, like this retailer merged with that retailer, particularly if you go online, you can see, you know, like this group of textile companies all under the one banner. Another one is the airline industry, and that happened in the early 90s. It's actually called One World or Alliance or something. Seriously, One World Alliance. And it was all the airline companies getting together, and what they did. So being in Australia and going to Europe, you know, you would pick some airline, and if you picked an Asian airline, you would fly from Melbourne, you would make a stopover somewhere in Asia, refuel, whatever, and continue on to Europe. If you were flying with a Middle Eastern airline, well, then you'd stop in the Middle East and refuel and go on. That changed where they merged all these companies. and merged a lot of their operations so that we had hubs on the planet. So it kind of didn't matter if you were going to, wherever you were going to, you would be corralled to a hub and then be sent out. And this is very much across the board with not just the transit of people, but also the transit of goods. So for instance, something made quite locally. It's a pie company.
A what company? Sorry, the connection's gone. Hold on. You're still frozen.
Yeah,
Okay, right. Something made quite locally.
Pies.
Pies.
For eating.
Okay.
Right. So those pies are made in a factory, half an hour away from me. Now, when I buy them at the supermarket, I don't actually buy them, but just saying, right, pretend I buy them.
You buy the pies,
isn't it funny how I have to put that clause in? I have to put that clause in, because otherwise people jump down my throat. What are you eating? So those pies, they are shipped to Melbourne from where they are distributed to the supermarket. So even though it could end up in my supermarket fresh, a half-hour drive, everything goes into that central warehouse hub and then gets redistributed, because that's what makes economic sense. And this is done with people as well. So sometimes, your airline ticket will have you going sort of halfway around the world just so you can come back the other way. Smart cities. So smart cities are very much predicated on the idea of, being able to control the resources that people use, maximizing profits, and that would mean maximizing the return on investment. So say, for example, a mega city, a big city, a very densely populated area that has a fireworks display. How many people get to enjoy it? Like thousands upon thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people get to see the fireworks in Melbourne at New Year's Eve. Now, when you do a fireworks display in a regional area that only 5,000 people are going to see, that's not very high return on investment. All those fireworks for just 5,000 people. Okay, so this is the idea generally of how to economize. It's just economics. It really is economics. How do we feed, clothe, entertain, educate, whatever, the 7 billion people on the planet using the least amount of resources, and the most, the way to optimize, a little bit of energy going a long way is, to have a big transport system, put them all on the train and move them all together. Don't have them going in their separate cars. And so these smart cities, what are they? From a technical perspective, Julianne Romanello put up a great post today about TOD, T-O-D, transit-oriented development. So, and this goes hand in hand with, I'm going to throw some jargon at you, corridors and nodes. And hold the transit-oriented development and the corridors and nodes, just put them just to the side here on the shelf back here. And let's talk about SimCity, which is Simulation City, a computer game I never played, but I did see somebody playing it and I thought it was fascinating. So you start off with a blank slate, and I don't know what the rules of the game are, but you get to build buildings. You get to put a hospital here, and you get to put a school and a shopping centre and all that fun stuff. Now, a lot of information was gathered from all those game players, and it's it's not surprising that humans ended up going, oh look, let's put lots of people here and let's give them all these excellent things at their doorstep. And from a philosophical point of view, it's like, well, we're building community again. It'll be like going back in time and having that community feel where you grew up is where you sort of spent the remainder of your days. It's where you went to school. It's where you knew the neighbors and you knew the shopkeeper, and everything was local and familiar, and we had different ties with people. Unlike today, where we don't even speak to our neighbors. We don't even know what they look like sometimes. If I ran into them at the supermarket, which I'm sure I do all the time, my connection is gone again.
It was poor. You are there now.
Okay. So this is what these smart cities are. They're future technologies fused with the old community feel-good stuff of, I don't know, the 1800s or the 1500s, or I don't know which century we'd have to go back to. And so that's what they're trying to sort of sell us, that we're going to have all this technology and everything we need at our doorstep. So the definition of one of these smart city communities would be within a 15-minute walk or cycle, you would have all of the essential things that you need for day-to-day living. And, essential, that came from COVID, for the essential things. Okay, so people learning to stop being greedy and to stop this overconsumption, this over, what else would we call it? Anyway, basically having essentials: hospitals, cafes, bars, the bakery, the post office, the park, things to do recreationally, the workplace, very important, and schooling, all to be within 15 minutes. So that sounds pretty nice, I would say. I don't think there's something inherently wrong with the idea of not wasting your life commuting and trying to traverse a massive city, just to see, just to, I don't know, get a doctor's appointment or whatever. And I think, no, I don't think, I know for a fact that they have really thought about this and how they're going to try to grow the organic community feeling in these places, and they have to do it quickly, is what they've noted, because otherwise people will be like, it feels really artificial. If anyone's been to Dubai or whatever, which is a rather artificial environment, because it's a city in a desert, and you don't make a city in a desert. It doesn't make much sense, but anyway. So these are the kinds of problems and things that they, knots that they need to tease out. How do we get that? How do we concoct? How do we make instant community? Because really, community is something that grows that's in time. It needs generations. It needs real interactions with people over time and family associations, and it needs all of that. But they want to recreate this, and conceptually it's okay. It's not really awful. The awful part of the smart city, what's the awful part? Not that your job will be local, not that the supermarket will be easy to get to, and that your kids will be playing just down the road. No, it'll be all the surveillance that's built into the smart city. And that's what they've been doing for, I reckon, about 15 years is where I'd gauge it, 15 to 20 years. The program's been quite accelerated, where they are what they call retrofitting our cities to have the infrastructure for the surveillance. Why the surveillance? People surely would manage without the surveillance. The surveillance is there because we can't be trusted to look after the environment or use moderate amounts of power and to do the right thing. We're just not trusted to do the right thing anymore. We're all by default kind of like villains and criminals. And by default, we must all hate the environment. I think that must be the perception. Because kind of like after 9/11, where they changed the whole airline industry, and from being a VIP when you went to the airport to travel, and, you know, they'd be, oh, hi, Miss Niles, and where are you traveling today? And they'd take your bag and weigh it for you. And now it's like, put your arms up. Let's x-ray you. Okay, so we went from, you know, people, VIPs that were traveling and we got special treatment and peanuts, literally, to being treated like felons and criminals, as though we were going to hijack the airplane with a bottle of water, or, you know, our nail clippers, we were going to hold those to somebody's neck, you know, all crazy stuff. So because it's very much a propaganda campaign of distrust, imbuing the mind of, you know, the public consciousness that everyone's bad, everyone's going to overuse, everyone's greedy, everybody wants to, you know, harm the environment, and nobody cares. And so for that reason, the surveillance is there to manage, monitor, and monetize. We got there, the 3 M's. Okay, so manage, monitor, and monetize. What are they going to manage? They're going to manage the people. They're going to make sure you don't leave the 15-minute city when you shouldn't. So there'll be opportunity to leave the 15-minute cities for sure. But you won't be getting a job that's outside of there. So you'll have, you know, your tokens or your credits, like now in the UK, where people can leave the 15-minute neighbourhoods, the low traffic neighbourhoods. They can go into them 100 times a year, and that's okay. But if you need to get more, then you need permission and exemptions. Again, COVID, you know, permission and exemptions.
Just clarify, that's for driving your car, just in case anybody thinks that we're trying to overhype what's going on. This is how it starts, is that you can't drive your car into certain areas, and you have to get permission to drive your car into certain areas. So it's the beginning of it. Anyway, carry on, please. I'm sorry, I interrupted your flow of thought. I think it does. Yeah, are you okay? I was going to say the surveillance is going to come from the streetlight. Oh, yeah. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Okay, yeah. So the surveillance is to make sure we're doing the right thing. And it is also there to, it's integral to the monetization. Because how do we explain that data is the new economy, that data is the new oil or the new gold or whatever? Okay, so can we take that premise as kind of fact, because no one's arguing that. All right. So it doesn't matter whether we look at the mainstream media, or the serious magazines, the non-serious magazines, there is a consensus that data is the new oil. Now, to lift it, to harvest it, to collect it, we need surveillance. This is part of the new economy, the data. And to have eyes everywhere, well, you could put up cameras everywhere. There are heaps of them at every traffic intersection. But what is less noticeable is our street lamps, which are already there. So, and I mean, all they're doing is changing the kind of light on it and putting some extra little features on. So they're rather, is the word I want conspicuous or inconspicuous?
Inconspicuous. They're kind of innocuous. We're used to them, you know.
Yeah. I mean, a camera pointing at you, you kind of see. And you see them at traffic intersections. And because they're traffic intersections, you kind of go, yeah, that's okay, because they're for red traffic lights and people speeding. And if somebody has an accident or if a pedestrian is hit, I mean, there's 100 reasons why, you know, even I can justify why they might be there. Not that I honestly mean that, but putting those in a suburban street wouldn't look very nice. And what would it cost? The poles are already there. They're already powered. They've already got the cabling. They have been recabling though. I'm wondering if people have noticed in their streets that not only are they tearing up kind of the roads and repaving them, they seem to be repaving just the edges. Sometimes they repave just the actual pavement, the footpath. And that's for new cabling. To be able to transmit all of the data, because when we're talking about a mega city's worth of data, and that data would be all the traffic, it would be the weather conditions, it would be whatever the satellites are picking up. The sun's doing a number on you.
I know. Give me 2 seconds. Let me just pull.
Yeah. So
I can't see you properly. There we go. Carry on. So the cabling is there so that the data can be harvested, and the data is important because the data is the new oil.
Yes, and you know, they talk about LEDs being, you know, more environmentally friendly, and I'm quite certain that they're not so environmentally friendly. What they are, and everything that's fourth industrial revolution or reset associated, is highly compatible with computers, technology, and AI.
Oh, your connection. Just hang on a minute.
Those LED lights.
Okay, highly compatible with your computers and or artificial intelligence, AI. That's where we are.
And those cameras. See, like those LEDs actually are. You don't need to read anything. All you need to do is actually go out and look at them. So we're not asking anyone to do any research. We're asking them to go out and look into these lights, and even then to look down and around and see their field of vision. And hopefully they remember how their field of vision was with the old lighting system. So certainly these lights are not helping, they're not friendly to humans. Perhaps they're friendly to the environment. What they are certainly compatible with is those cameras. You know, the way the light hits the face and how many rays and the beams and whatever works with, you know, mapping facial features. And I suppose it's probably more economical for in some technological way. I don't have the words to describe it. I think I did have a little bit of a conversation with Aman about this, but I forget the details. But definitely, whatever we're seeing, the changes in the roads, the narrowings, bollards, concrete barriers, that's all for autonomous vehicles. We don't, because they need to know where they need to know where the road ends. See, we've got eyes and we can see where the road ends. A car may have at the moment up to 16 cameras on it, but still that's not enough. So with sonar technology, you put a barrier there and it just bounces the laser and goes, oh, barrier. So like that's far more streamlined technology for autonomous vehicles. So this smart city is something that is being designed to be very compatible with automated processes, automated street lighting, for drones and robots and automated vehicles to navigate. And so it's really counterintuitive that we're going to have this really sweet, nice community, but it's actually a place built for robots, optimized for their eyes, optimized for their ears, because it is the internet of eyes and ears, this internet of things. So this smart city has all the conveniences and all the essentials, so you don't have to travel far, therefore you don't consume too much gas and petrol, wasting all this money and causing all this global warming and carbon dioxide. And at the same time, it's lifting all the data because it needs to optimize everything. So if there's lots of, cars coming from over there, or, there's a concert happening over there, well, then the traffic lights need to, readjust themselves for this. Also, we need to geofence. So another part of the automated process, another reason for the surveillance. So that surveillance is not just lifting data, it's watching where you go, it's making decisions about where you can and can't go. It's also learning.
Could you just define geofencing so that people who don't know, haven't heard the term before, understand that this is the long-term implication of allowing smart city technology to prevail?
Yeah, so because we can't be trusted to stay within our boundaries, geofencing is all of that information coming together in supercomputers, because only supercomputers can crunch the amount of data required for this smart city. So we've got eyes and ears watching people and calculating how many miles they traveled this week, this month, this year, where they're going, the reason they're going there, how many credits, carbon credits they have, do they have enough money for this, have they, is their ESG score good enough that they're allowed to participate in something. So we've got supercomputers calculating at the speed of light or something, huge amounts of data in order to operate this city smoothly. Now, geofencing is like an electronic fence, you might call it. It operates primarily, again, on transactions. So what I said right at the beginning, that transactions are the be all and end all, it's quite true. if I want to put fuel in my car, that's a transaction. If it is denied, I can't put fuel in the car. If I want to charge my car, my electronic car, my electric vehicle, that's again a transaction. That one is, you know, if we take it all the way to the end and its conclusion, an electric vehicle is remotely operable. And so geofencing might mean that they cut the engine when you try to go to the wrong place. But more likely than not, it's not going to happen that way. It will just be with transactions denied, or you'll have a certain amount of miles or kilometers that you can do in a year, and you will stay within those bounds. You're not going to try to, go rogue. You won't be able to go rogue in a cashless society. If all of your
that's a good, I want to hear about we want to go on to digital ID and CBDCs and what they are and why they're important. So that ties in nicely here.
So that geofencing will be automatic doors not opening to somewhere where you're not meant to be. So for example, let's say that there was an outbreak of some virus in your workplace. Now, instead of shutting down the whole world like we did with COVID, the people in that workplace that were there on that day, who through surveillance infrastructure, they can see the machines, right? Using facial recognition, are able to identify who exactly came into contact with patient 0, means that only those people will have to stay home and self-isolate. Not everybody that worked in the building, the guy that got in the lift with him, the person that sat with him at lunch, the person sitting directly next to him, perhaps his boss who went up to him. So here we're getting into the nuance that comes with surveillance technology and how it will be sold to us as something good. Because when you think about it, like, why should the whole building be shut down? Why should the whole world go into lockdown? They shouldn't. So now we've got this granular detail. We know exactly who to isolate, and that will feel fair. That's what that's going to do. So there are many sides to each component of this fourth industrial revolution reset agenda. Each little thing, you can tease it apart for 3 years and never get to the end of it. So this, surveillance and geofencing. So that person being isolated, we call that geofencing. How? Because it is enforced. Because if this person tries to open their front door, perhaps it won't open because there's a smart lock on it. That's geofencing. Or they get out their front door and they try to get onto the train or the tram or the Uber, and the door doesn't open for them, or they're swiping, their transaction doesn't work. It probably won't be with a card. It will actually just be through facial recognition. You won't need to carry anything. You won't even need a chip inside you with facial recognition. And I'm not saying there will be or there won't be a chip. It looks very much like chips will be coming into fashion, or we'll be talking about those in a couple of years. But in the meantime, they're not required. I don't even need to be carrying around my smartphone for that facial recognition to identify who I am, identify what's in my bank account and what my, credit rating, or how many carbon credits I've got left to be able to do something. So that's what geofencing is. And so now we come to the next topic, which you said was What was
So
the other thing?
digital ID and CBDCs, they all play a part in what you were talking about there. So
Okay, so all this, if we had cash in this smart city, it would ruin the whole thing for them, right? Because if, you know, the camera says, no go, no, Cindy, you can't have that. And I pull a wad of cash and give it to the shopkeeper, the shopkeeper isn't going to say, nah, no, I don't want your cash. You know, oh, I care too much about the environment. I'm thinking about the 1.5. Cindy, you can't have those shoes. It's not going to happen. That denial has to come from somewhere else. They know the shopkeeper's not going to do it. So cash is not compatible with a smart city. And personally, I feel it's actually too late to be trying to press the brakes on that one. I think it's kind of sailed, that ship. There is a growing momentum, and it is a fact that more shopkeepers are seeing more cash circulate than they have in the recent years. I just don't think it's enough. I really don't think it's enough. So, you know, cashless society is fundamental to the smart city operation, because cash is like playing outside of the game. It would be like having counterfeit money in today's on today's Monopoly board. It's like, well, hang on a second, you're bypassing all the rules. And that's what cash would mean. So there's no doubt about cashless, about them trying to implement it. Now, I don't know if people will rise up, because they'll have to rise up on principle. And this is the problem. People don't rise up on principle. People only rise up when, you know, they're choking, and they're not going to choke them. That's the thing. They're not going to, it's incremental. You know, first, you know, we'll make it very gradual. Most people have opted to use plastic cards and electronic transactions, even when cash is still there. So, I mean, the incrementalism has taken massive strides towards this. Now, you know, we will get to the point where they say, okay, you've got to bring in your notes now. You know, your notes will be valid for another 6 months or a year or whatever. And slowly it will happen. And at the beginning, people will not be denied anything. It will flow. It will operate very much like our cash does today. No one's going to say, Cindy, you can't have those shoes. You've, you know, done, you're up, you know, you've done your quota of shoes for you know, for the year. It will happen very, very, very incrementally. So by the time people feel this geofencing or encounter this denial of access, denial of a transaction, cash will be so long gone that really the only option will be to actually create our own currency. And that's another far-fetched idea, in my opinion. And your other question, sorry, did I?
No, yeah, you answered some of it. So obviously the cash is going to be replaced by a central bank digital currency. And that literally just means, that you will have an account full of digital tokens, essentially. And if you could take it from there and explain how the digital ID and is kind of why are we going to need a digital ID?
Well, a digital, it's a digital world. It's everything that will happen first online. Everything will have to be okayed or denied first by the computer, the algorithms, the clouds, the servers, right? before real life is even allowed to proceed. You know, when I try to make a transaction, all of my history, everything that is pertinent, will need to be communicated, convened by the AI, and it will decide if Cindy, the real Cindy, can have that bottle of water, and what to deduct from her carbon credits for that bottle of water. So that's why we need to have digital ID, because the resources will be appropriated, they'll be allocated per individual. Nobody's going to say, oh, show us, you know, your stamps or your card so we can click it. It won't operate like that. It needs to be done digitally, because it's a digital world. Essentially everything is automated, and it needs to be the easiest possible kind of identification, and that's why they're going for biometric facial ID. You know, you can't really fake your face, but they're not satisfied with the face. They're going to use, you know, the geography and topography of your ear. They're going to use, you know, the way we all have a very unique way of walking. It's as unique as our fingerprint, apparently. So even a back shot of me walking down the street, that AI knows, oh, that's probably Cindy. It probably would need a little bit more information to verify that it's Cindy. But just from my very unique walk, it would know who I am, and it would know whether to open those doors or keep them closed.
Right. Yep, absolutely. So we've got the universal basic income. I know this is all big stuff, but it's really important. It all plays a part. So what will universal basic income, why the universal basic income?
Universal basic income is the consolation prize. It's the hush money. It's the dependence. Because, well, when the jobs are disappearing and they're not being replaced, you know, that's a bit of a fantasy that we can all have a job in technology, because that's really all that's going to be left. When those jobs disappear, well, there is a responsibility on the government to provide, and the only real solution is to provide an income to people who aren't explicitly working. So who's going to argue with UBI? But at the same time, it's utter dependency and on the state, or the public-private partnerships, and it'll be crumbs. Because you know, it might start off okay, but anyone who's ever been on welfare knows that it's usually even less than a basic income or a basic wage for that place where you reside. It's only enough for the bare essentials. And when you depend on someone else for your bread, for your healthcare, for your education, for your entertainment, amusement, for your shelter, well, then you do what you're told. So it's basically, you know, all this technology is disruption. And how do you get people to go along with it? How do you say to somebody, I'm taking your job and I'm not giving you anything to replace it, to substitute it? Instead, people will be told, oh, look, the robots are going to do the job, but you'll still get paid. And at the beginning, it'll be incrementalism again. It's going to start off pretty good. The money's going to be okay. It will incrementally shrink, though, so that you need to do more to survive. We're following the same formula as before. We're always running on a treadmill. Sometimes, you know, we feel like we're actually getting ahead. Most of the times we're kind of sedentary or stationary, not going far. And other times we feel like we're going to fall at the back. You know, when my dad was in his 20s, his one wage was enough to raise a family. And from the 70s until the 2000s, we got to a point, not only is that guy on, you know, that blue collar guy not going to buy a house and raise a family of 4 on his own, well, as being the only breadwinner. Now you can have like 2 people working full time who without children who can't afford a home. So that incrementalism, that way is, so we're keeping some of the old rules from the old board game. Those things, you know, there's nothing new under the sun. Well, the main principles won't change. We will be running on that treadmill for sure, to stay alive. But in the beginning, it'll be like, okay, they're taking the jobs because, you know, that's how innovation is and it's inevitable, and, you know, oh, you can't stop progress. But I'm going to be compensated. I'm still going to be able to live my life. And that's going to sound okay. And it may be okay for a little while. It won't be for very long, though, because we are considered a resource. We are called human capital, as much as the propaganda has us feeling that we're useless eaters and that we're the scourge on the planet and all of that rubbish. In actual fact, the humans are the diamonds and the gold. That's where the real money is, in human beings. And it doesn't matter how you want to look at it, whether you know, whether somebody could prove that scientifically, that we're the well of wealth on this planet for ourselves and for humans. You know, take a human and put him or her on a deserted island. He doesn't want a TV. He doesn't want an internet connection. He doesn't even want you to give him special food. He or she wants another human being there. We're everything is what we are. They know it. They're trying to make us think that we aren't. Most of us don't even know it anymore, what we're worth. But the impact investors absolutely know what we're worth.
So please do tell us about social impact investing and public-private partnerships.
Yeah, so it's an economic model, and we've had a company gets stronger, going back to something I said earlier, when it, you know, merges and it amalgamates with other companies or takes them over. You know, the big company goes and eats up all the little independent guys and becomes bigger. You know, think of hardware stores. You know, they used to be like family-run businesses, and then there was like one chain that kind of opened up, and there was even another chain that opened up, and now all the family business ones are gone. It's not even 2 chains anymore. It's one big one. And it seems to actually have crossed the boundaries, our international waters, and gone to another country as well. So we're talking about merging and centralizing business, money, and governance. And this same thing has happened with our suburbs. Our suburbs, which, we used to have quite narrow borders, it was called, something over here, and you could cycle to the end of your suburb. That was really easy. I've noticed in pretty much every country in the world, they've been amalgamating the councils into big municipalities and then amalgamating them again. And so we have this pattern of amalgamation, merging, which means centralized control, whether it's commercial and private or whether it is public and government or state. We're seeing this same pattern, and now it's the mother of all mergers when you get the public and the private coming together and merging into a corporate entity, because if there is any percentage of private, well, it's not public. It can't be public. It doesn't matter what the percentage is. So I think they started off, with little bits of like, it's 10% privately owned. The something like the ABC channel, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, which was like the state TV channel or press. And like it slowly kind of incrementally grows and to a point where it's like 50%. And then who's accountable? Who is accountable when something is public-private? We end up with a situation that if you try to find some kind of recourse through the public or through the state, they'll say, oh, that's the responsibility of the private sector over there, so you'll have to call them. And then when you go to them, they'll be like, oh no, the government's tied our hands, that's all we can do. And we've got this situation where we're caught in the middle because we have this, let's call it what it is, it's quite fascistic. It's the state and private corporations that have merged together because, well, I suppose that's what happens when you keep concentrating money. At some point, this is an inevitable conclusion. This is the logical conclusion of mergers and more mergers and fewer hands holding the resources. So we're at the stage now where we've got public-private partnerships running the schools, running the hospitals, running the medical system. Everything that was the responsibility of government. The reason we have government, they can't afford to do it anymore. They can't afford to do all those things and fulfill their obligations to the public because they sold all the utilities. They sold the gas, they sold the electricity, they sold the telecommunications company, they sold the broadcasters, they sold, they offshored the mining. They did, like, we don't have manufacturing here anymore. So now we have a government that has not nearly enough revenue, needs to be absolutely propped up by the private sector. But the private sector can only do that at a price. It's not going to come in and say, oh, here's an interest-free loan to the government so that you can provide health services and education. No, now we're playing our rules. So we're footing the bill. Therefore, we want not just return, we want data, and we want to make up the rules. This leads us into environmental social governance. So, this new monopoly game, this new version, which isn't being run by representative government anymore, which is being propped up by the private sector, they've done the smartest thing ever in the world. Instead of competing amongst each other, which is kind of what they did before, we've got the, Apple's got the best product, IBM's got the best product. So, you're like, oh, yeah, I'll choose this one. Well, no, it seems like the best way for them to concentrate their power, concentrate the money, shift it from the bottom to the top was, well, for them to get together and cooperate like a cartel does and pretty much take over government. And so this is the very unfortunate position that we're in now. We've got this public-private sector, which incorporates something called civil society. Now, civil society is that thing that's the NGO, the corporation that doesn't seem to be just a commercial enterprise like, Coca-Cola. Like, that's really clear cut. We make soft drinks, we sell them, we make a profit. That's our goal. What are the goals? Or the motivations or the funding or the people in charge of things like the World Health Organization? They're unelected. Who's paying for them? Like, it's they're somewhere kind of in between. They're in center stage, but we can't sort of point the finger at them and go, oh, corporation or government. So these civil societies are playing a massive role. These NGOs that have more money than our governments, And so, but because they're not government, so they've got the resources, they've got the money, but they haven't got the control because the law is not on their side. The Constitution isn't set up that way to go, come in, Bill Gates, and make the rules. It's not. So the best way for that to happen is through these mergers. And that's where we find ourselves now. We find ourselves with a new, what they're calling a new compact. And this new compact is essentially a social contract, which none of us have ever signed before. It's one of those, the unwritten rules of society kind of a thing. But they've explicitly spoken about a new social compact, and this part of this new social compact or contract comes from these public-private partnerships. So this, which implements a new system of governance. We can't have the old governance system with this new economy. It's just not going to work. It's like, it's not the game that we're playing now. We've moved on. And so from once we had, commercial law and civil law and common law and contract law and all these sorts of laws, well, now it's pretty much being overlaid or underlaid or with something called environmental social governance. And so environmental social governance pertains, in the literature, reads as though it's all about, for corporate, entities. Guidelines of how to do business is what it means. This is, how we'll collect tax. These are the things you'll have to declare. These are the new rules. And it's all pitched to corporations. And so reading it, you kind of go, I'm not a corporation. Unfortunately, we are. And, our countries haven't, a tax filing, somewhere on the stock exchange. And each one of us has one of those too. Our state is our corporation. Our councils are actually corporations in law, and this is nothing to do with conspiracy theory. This is black and white. If somebody should look with their eyes open, and with us, you do need a little bit of understanding of the law, but you really don't need a lot. as in you don't need to put in hours. Other people say, oh, you need to spend hours and hours understanding this. Well, if what you're aiming for is not to advocate for yourself in a court of law, but you just want the gist of what is going on around you, you really don't need to spend hours and hours. And quite frankly, there is an act, act means, an act of law that says, that they've changed this. For example, the city of Melbourne is now the name of the corporation of what was once the council of the city of Melbourne. So now it's straight the city of Melbourne. That's actually a corporation. So, and from there we understand that this environmental social governance means the new laws and regulations and policies and rules for all of us. It's the way, if we work at a supermarket, or if we work for Deloitte Chartered accountants, or we're flying an airplane for this company, or we're an Uber driver, it actually doesn't matter. We are part of that system, and that what is environmental social governance is a system of law based on the Paris Treaty and of 2015 and the Earth Summit of Rio de Janeiro in 1992. There's been another one. Was it Glasgow? God. And also, to sum up what all those treaties are and what they've, what are all those treaties? Can we get it down to bullet points? It's 17 bullet points, and they're called Sustainable Development Goals. So all that talk, all that hype, hundreds and hundreds of papers about how to heal the world, how to rezone places, how to protect the environment, how to protect human rights, the Charter of Human Rights. The Charter now includes progeny that has not been born yet. This is where we get into really tight philosophical territory of making decisions for things that don't exist, and using predictive modeling and computing and all this stuff that so far has proven to actually be
rubbish.
Wrong.
It's just wrong.
Wrong every time. It's like it's been wrong every time, but this time I think we got it right. And let's change the world according to these models. So these sustainable development goals set out the law for every sector, aspect of living on this planet, whether you're a human or an animal or a microbe or a tree or a river. It sets out the law so for the ultimate goal of monetizing, monitoring, and managing all life on the planet. What's an example?
Hold on, you have gone, just so you know.
Of an SDG. SDG.
Okay. An example of an SDG is?
Yeah, Sustainable Development Goal number 6 is about water, drinking water, potable water. And there's all these, targets and things to meet. And, at a superficial glance, and a quick look, it looks like they want to make sure everybody has access to fresh, clean water and sanitation. there isn't a person on the planet that isn't a psychopath that would argue that every person born to this planet has a right to clean water. Like, it's very, very simple. But that's what it's meant to look like on the outside, because there's so much policy and jargon and rhetoric involved that it takes it takes a long time to kind of to go through that information and to arrive at a point where you go, huh? Oh, so they don't mean it's actually a right. They're saying they're the right. You'll have access. You'll have the right to access, but unless you fulfill your obligations, you won't get the water. And it gets to a point where you start seeing that it's all about money making. It's all about somebody else owning the water. You know, from a position where it was something that was ruled over or governed over by the territory that that water was found in or that it exists in. Now it's going to be managed and monetized and monitored by this public-private indigenous corporation. And then they're going to put it on the stock market and the price of it will go up, and you'll have a water credits wallet, like you'll have a carbon credits wallet, and there'll be a smart water meter at your house. And so even though we've actually not had an issue on this planet, even with 7 billion people on it, we are not water scarce. That is the principle that we will live by, because the models said we're going to be water scarce and therefore we should start saving now. And that means, you know, you read a little bit more and then you say, well, actually, we're not going to be accessing the fresh water. We're going to be recycling the dirty water that we've already used, so that the new deposits of rain accumulate. And the more they accumulate, well, the richer the people who are managing and monetizing and monitoring this will get. But I won't have as much water, or from where we have done statistics and surveys to see that each person living in a country like Australia generally uses 150 litres per person per day, well, the quota will be 50. So instead of them going with, okay, that's the standard amount of water a person requires to stay clean, to have clean clothes, to wash their dishes, to clean their house, to clean their car, to drink, to eat, whatever, to run their dishwasher. So instead of them going, that's the benchmark, they've gone, well, we'll reduce that down to a third. So that means that, yes, people in places that perhaps don't have any water or good proper access to water will have, well, may have, let's see, if they've never managed to fill any other of their quotas, should have access to that water. But what we can be sure of is that the people in the West and these are, industrialized countries or post-industrial countries, well, you can bet that our water consumption will be drastically reduced. And it's very, very easy when inside of a smart city that is running by computers and is run remotely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, thank you so much. I know I'm really sort of stretching you here, but I'm so grateful, because I think so far just we've covered Agenda 2030. What is it? What role did COVID play in bringing it about? Digital ID and smart cities and 20-minute neighbourhoods, how the surveillance will be affected and what the deal is with the LED street lighting, We've talked about the CBDCs and the universal basic income, and SDGs and public-private partnerships and ESGs. All of these things really important, well worth researching if you have the time. If you don't, find Cindy online or Julianne Romanello and start to read their back posts, and you will get a really good understanding of all of these things. It's not beyond anyone. It wasn't beyond me. The only thing that I have left, Cindy, well, two things, sorry, that I kind of thought it would be good to cover. One of them you've part covered. Just going to bring it up one more time so that you can round it off, is the AI. And now you've talked about automating jobs, and you've talked about how the smart cities will be run by artificial intelligence. I just wondered, is there anything else you would like to say about the AI? Because it's obviously a huge component. It's how our lives will be run if we go forward in this manner.
Okay, so if the underlying assumption is that we need to reduce our consumption, our travel, and that by implication means, well, not having a private vehicle, not traveling, not eating beef and all those sorts of things, it means that we'll be sort of quite limited to being at home. Not moving around much, and that also means that we won't be seeing people in real life as much if we're working online, educating online, getting health appointments online. We'll be attending virtual concerts instead of real life concerts. There's literally smart toys being made, and there's even a World Economic Forum Smart Toy Awards, and
sorry,
and it was actually really miserable.
I bet you it was,
because they're designing toys now as company for children, so that they're like a teacher and like a friend. I can't think of anything really more dystopian than giving a child an AI toy that supervises the child, that monitors the child, that teaches the child, that draws enough analytics from the child in order to, and then decides instruction so that this child is adapted to the fourth industrial revolution, because that's what education is about now anyway. It's about, being a good citizen and fitting into society. It's not about, academic excellence and learning philosophy and stuff like that. No, it's about, molding the human to fit into the society. So, whether it's, to know how to push the buttons or whatever, AI training a child to fit into society, which is this ESG stuff, which is predictive modeling of what's going to be, and at the same time learning from the child, emotional responses, and trying to teach an AI teaching a child emotional response, because they did make a point of making special toys for the children with autism and autism spectrum disorders. So because they don't get along so well with people, these toys would be great for those kids. If the child can't connect to people, how is an AI toy going to help that situation? It goes into things that I can't really put into words. I can have, however, a very visceral reaction to it. AI. making decisions for rearing children, in a sense. I don't know if I answered your question, but that is what sprung to mind.
Okay. I feel like that is a really, really good place to leave the topic of AI, because it leaves it wide open for other people to step in and take an interest, because if you don't, that's where it's going. So thank you. And it's horrific. And that, I'm going to end this here with the last question is going to be, so most people by now will have heard Agenda 2030, you'll own nothing and be happy. Okay. The last thing I had on my list of questions to ask you is this bit about you'll own nothing. How are they going to affect the removal of private land and private property from people so that they own nothing? It's hard for, I think, people to see how that would actually happen. Do you think you could enlighten us a little bit?
Okay, so the first and most obvious way that they're going about crashing the economy, which means taking people's savings, is by inflating that money away. Now, how do you inflate money away? What on earth does that mean? So I've got $100,000 in the bank, or in my savings, or in superannuation for when I get old and retire. Now, 5 years ago, with that money, my purchasing power was amazing. I could buy a property, let's say, or a piece of land or a piece of farmland. Today, I can't buy the same. I don't have the same purchasing power that I had. So that money hasn't been touched. Nobody took a cent. It's exactly $100,000 5 years later. But what I can buy with it is a lot less. And people are seeing that at the supermarket, cornflakes or meat, oh yeah, meat's just gone through the roof, I think. It's very, very, very expensive. So that money sitting in the bank may have dropped by 20%. Like, it's kind of like you've got 80,000 there now. If we look at it sort of in a cold sense of what I can buy with it, let's say I had this 100,000 20 years ago and I compare it to today. So that is the first way that we're losing what we have. Now, let's say you're smart and you've got property. So property actually has gone up from 20 years ago. So you might be almost rich. At the same time, in the last 20 years, and especially now, they're like in fifth gear with taxes and land taxes and property taxes. And so you may think you own it outright, but if you don't pay those taxes yearly, and if you can't afford insurance and all those things, the fact of the matter, if they can take it away from you because you didn't pay that bill, it's kind of not really yours. But this is what they're going to continue doing. They're going to continue increasing the land taxes and property taxes. Already they're imposing certain environmental, social governance rules on property owners in the UK, I think, and in Europe as a whole, to make property or housing, more sustainable, environmentally friendly, in other words. People have to put a specific kind of insulation, or they have to put solar panels, or they need to change their heating system, and these rules will get, so at the moment it's kind of optional, but incrementally they're moving them to a point where if you don't do these things, it's like not having paid your land tax, and your house, your property may be taken away from you because you are not a good guardian of the property. You are unable to fulfill your obligations to the earth, to Gaia, to the next generation, because you haven't applied those things. You haven't done those things for your house. And I saw a video somewhere, so it's just a video that I saw, that somebody had calculated what it would actually cost to bring a house, a property in Europe up to the standards. And it was something in the realm of 100,000, which is a lot of money. That's not loose change that anyone has in their pockets. So that's another way. Now, lastly, probably, and this is the most interesting way, is through something called land value capture. Land value capture brings us back to something I put on the shelf earlier, something called transit-oriented development, corridors and nodes. So this is the building, this is the basic framework of a smart city. Think of, and I had talked a little bit about simulations, simulating a city in those games. All right, so a corridor is like a corridor in the truest sense that you understand it. In your house, it is the passage, and off it comes the bedrooms, the bathroom, the laundry, the kitchen. Same thing, scaled to a city. So you've got arterial roads or main sort of corridors where business happens, where hospitals are. So you come off this road and there's a hospital over here, and over there there's the supermarket, and there is the post office. So this is where you go through to get to pretty much everywhere. Nodes on this map that you have in your imagination of, this long winding road, or maybe it's a straight road with these major landmarks there. The nodes are centers of business. So it could be a shopping complex, or it could be a train station. So a lot of business happens around these areas. Now, a city, if you design it from scratch like you would in a computer game, that's kind of where you'd start with the corridor. You'd say, here's the main road, right? I'm going to put the hospital here. I'm going to put the school here, and blah, blah, blah. So public transport, we're going to bring people right into this street. And in the surrounds, we're going to put some parklands, and we're going to put residences and this and this and this and that. That concept of, I'm going to put a hospital on my game here, in Cindy City. I'm going to put a hospital over there because that's going to raise the value of my city. Because if my city has a hospital and Temora's city doesn't, well, I'm going to draw bigger numbers. And then not only am I going to have, that train station, I'm going to put little extra corridors of trams, and so I can service out these other streets as well. And if I've got a tram line there, then I can draw investors to that, because people can get there and they are going to build XYZ. They're going to redevelop, develop, blah, blah, blah. All right. So land value capture is the more infrastructure, services, facilities you offer per square meter or per square kilometer of an area, the more you raise the value of that square kilometer. A street that, and that's actually a metric, by the way, and there is actually a counter, a real counter in Melbourne, a smart counter that is counting footfall, counting pedestrians, and when they pass, where they pass, how they're going, and all of that. So this is actually happening at the moment, where they're counting people because, like I said earlier, human capital is where the money is. So more people drawn to an area increases the value of an area. How do you get more people into that area? You give them stuff that they need. So, which is great. Let's say you've got a house on that street where they put a tram. And because they put a tram, they put up, this little shopping mall, and they've got that cool cafe. And so your property now is more valuable. Just because there are more people who want to live there, it raises, it's supply and demand. So classic rules that we've had from all the game boards are being applied. Now, because your house is worth more, well, we're not just going to let you have something more valuable. You'll be taxed accordingly. So if your property goes up in value, your taxes and your rates will go up. Now, when it is an engineered kind of thing, when they sort of come out of nowhere and decide this suburb that you live in, which is not some cool inner gentrified suburb. No, it's like a fringe suburb. You tell your friends that you live in the sticks. Now, when they contrive to make a smart community, a smart neighborhood, a 15-minute neighborhood out of your area, and they come in with a bunch of money, and they're going to put a hospital there, and they're going to put a shopping mall there, and 2 new schools and all this stuff, and the price of your land kind of goes up dramatically. Your wages don't go up dramatically. Mm-hmm. Your options then become either to sort of knock it down and build it up so that you can collect rent to be able to pay the taxes that your house now needs to pay, or you sell it and you get more money, but then you have to pay back taxes because, you get taxed for selling, for inheriting, for whatever you do. If you look at money, you should know that half of it's already been taken by the tax department. So there is this program, an actual example of it is called the Windfall tax. And that is being applied in the state of Victoria in Australia. It is rather specifically for regional and rural areas, farmland, basically. So farmland that has been rezoned and designated as residential. It was once worth not much per square hectare or acre. Now it is worth a whole lot, because we're going to have, the train, the tram, the hospitals, and because of that, the huge sort of income, the windfall of selling this farm, I think more than 50% of that will be taxed by the public-private partnerships. So how will we end up with nothing? Well, they've worked it out. They didn't just dream it up. And why? Why? It's dependency. That's the only thing. Like, you can only control, and it's not, we say, oh, to control people, and the image that comes to people's minds is, you're a puppeteer with strings and controlling your every move, and it's never going to be so obvious. Like, it's not going to look like that. It will be gentle digital nudging. It will be the forces of society. When everyone puts on a mask, well, you feel funny not wearing a mask. When, your boss says, well, you need to do it this way, you need to fill in this form, and, maybe you need to cycle your bike here twice a week just so we can tick the boxes, my friend. And you'll be like, all right, well, I'll just tell him I rode and he'll tick the boxes, and that'll be okay. We're going to get away with that. We're going to get away with ticking the boxes even without doing stuff. surveillance later on down the track will go, no, he didn't actually cycle to work. No, he didn't, you know. So it's forces, it's incrementalism, and very much, it's all very much geared to work with soft power, not hard power. In the beginning, you talked about what we saw on the television with the truckers in Canada. We saw something very similar with rubber bullets in Melbourne. That was very shocking for people. It was a fear campaign. But that is not how they're going to operate this. This is going to be done with consensus and community and a lot of shaming. A lot of shaming is going to go into this. Like, shame on you for having your porch light on. Shame on you for washing your car every week. Like, why do you need to wash your car every week? There are people, there are children in Ethiopia who haven't had a shower, and you're washing your car. Like, this is the sort of thinking. And I think we've seen it with many things in society already.
Mm-hmm. And I was wrong, actually, Cindy. One last thing, which I think is really important. Would you please define communitarianism for people so that we can round off with that as the sun, you know, I know. I make it so easy on you, don't you? It's like the sunshine, you know, the sunshine's giving me grief. So I'm giving you comparative amounts of grief. So communitarianism, I want people to have the term. I don't expect them to come away from this with like a full, you know, philosophical grounding in it, but I do want them to have the term and be interested enough in the term to retain the information. So there you go. Okay, so I've tried to stick to like as much as I can to make it vanilla. To make it kind of technical. And now you're asking me to dive right into, what is it? It's the philosophy or ideology, if you want to call it. But it's a whole lot more than that. Because behind things like ESG, which are for public consumption, environmental social governance, and let's save the planet in 1.5 degrees, and things like inclusivity, diversity, which are public consumption. They're like in your face all the time. It's the campaign, it's the it's what you're meant to think about. You know, you're meant to have, you know, concepts in your mind when you think diversity. You're meant to think everyone's welcome. Inclusivity, same thing. Like, nobody should be left out, you know. And that they play on basic principles. They play on the average normal person in the world who wants to have a good life and wants everybody else to have a good life. Because if everyone's having a good life, well, they're not going to interfere with me having my good life, right? You know, if we're all fed, no one's starving, no one's trying to break into my house. Like, that's how the world works. So that's how it could work in our minds. So we're given all these words, these buzzwords: equity. And we have assumptions about those things. Communitarianism is a whole lot of words, assumptions that are meant to connote and we're meant to have associations with these words. Very, very specifically, I don't think I've actually read anything about the Fourth Industrial Revolution that's come from either a public entity or a private entity or a civil entity or an NGO or a charity or whatever without encountering the word community over and over and over and over again. It's like, kind of like, it's always there. It's always in the background, and always, you know,
Klaus Schwab has said something like his book after the Great Reset is called The Great Narrative. So it's called The Great Narrative because without a story, nothing makes sense. It's the reason you've got me here talking. You're trying to give people a story that makes sense, that puts all these pieces of a puzzle together into a story, because only through a connected narrative do humans understand anything. Like, we're not robots. Things that are out of context don't make sense to us. So communitarianism is the advanced narrative of this centralization, of this globalization. It ties, it kind of works it on every level, you know, whether you're thinking in political terms, and no matter how you scale it, you know, you can scale up and you can scale down. It's a thread that ties all this together. At the macro level, community is another way of saying one world government, of centralized government. You know, you call it a community, it sounds a whole lot better than calling it the association. You know, Julianne Romanello found another piece of, you know, another, God, that woman, she just finds stuff every day to, you know, confuse it. Not to confuse, like to add one more piece of the puzzle, but you kind of look at that piece of the puzzle and go, oh my God, where does it go? Where do I fit it? Okay, so it used to be called the association, and the association is this merging of all these, you know, very, very rich corporations, entities, people, whatever they are. Communitarianism is having a one world religion. At the moment, it's called interfaith. And so what they're doing is, you know, making religion kind of fluid. You sort of like choose your own adventure, take a little bit of this and take a little bit of that. You know, a little bit of Hinduism, a bit of Taoism, a little bit of Christianity. You know, those ideas in the, I don't know, the Talmud may be okay, and let's take a little bit of from Allah. Sorry, I'm not a religious person myself, and therefore, you know, I probably sound really stupid saying that, but that is actually what interfaith is. It is a blending of religions. So it's a coming together. If we're going to have a centralized government, we can't have these very, very diverse rules, beliefs, cultures, languages, faiths. They are too antagonistic. Theoretically, they are too antagonistic, and they've gone to great lengths to show us in the last couple of decades that Christians want to fight Muslims, and Black people hate white people, and white people hate Black people, and men hate women, and women hate men, and they've gone to very, very great lengths to portray this. I don't believe any of it is actually organic. Yes, there is, you know, an inherent xenophobia, but that is not the same as, you know, coming, you know, at each other with arms. It's not the same thing. So communitarianism is a philosophical system of, because it's very important that we capture everything. You know, this isn't just economy, and it's not just law. And communitarianism, by the way, is law. It's called community law in Europe. It's called acquis communautaire, and it is part of the deal of being part of the European Union. If your country is part of the European Union, if you are part of the Schengen area, your country has been signed up to the community, and acquis communautaire actually means in English acquired by the community. Which community? Is it your local community, Temora? I don't think so. It's the community of corporations. So it is a system of law. In Europe, you see it actually at the highest tiers of law. Where the country has to abide by these laws. It comes before your own constitution. In places like Australia, we see it at the council level. So we've got a community law officer. I've spoken to her, my local one. And
God bless her.
Yeah. So it's actually very, very interesting that we've been infiltrated, like actually the legal system. And the thing is, like, nobody would talk about it. Nobody really knows about it. Even the people that talk about common law, and they can tell you about martial, not martial, maritime law and commercial law and contract law, and all these people that know the Constitution inside out and the Bill of Rights and stuff. And somehow they don't talk about community law and community policing, which are actual tangible, real things that are happening. They're not ideas in a book, not making this up. So it's a system of religion and philosophy, a way of living, and that is that blended ideology, but it's very much sort of focused on Eastern philosophies of collectivism, of and oneness, as in we may be kind of like single cells in an organism which is a mass. So like where humanity is like a mass, like the ants are kind of like, they might be individuals, but the organism is the colony. And that is where the technology sector is going. It is where the new age sector is going to intersect with technology. And it is where the Eastern philosophy comes in. If you can think of those three things coming together and intersecting, New Ageism, technology, and some of the Eastern doctrines that come from the Taoism and is it so much Hinduism or is it Confucianism? I get confused because I'm not a scholar in these things, but I have looked at them enough, and I have heard from the horse's mouth, which is Amitai Etzioni, that this is what the plan is. And why do I believe it? Because when I look outside, when I go to the shopping center, when I reflect upon my life, there wasn't the most Eastern influence that we had in Melbourne was Chinese restaurants. And then it became yoga centers. And then it became like we had all these shops with, well, what am I going to call them? Oriental things. It started permeating into magazines, popular culture. So it's like, well, it's enriching to have other cultures. It's enriching to understand them. It is, you can sort of pick and choose what fulfills you in life, or what expresses you, or what resonates with you. And that's all great when it's your choice and it's not a system of law, because that's what we're talking about when we talk about communitarianism and what's Cindy's problem with, Eastern philosophy. I've got no issue with it at all. I've got an issue with losing my individual rights, my rights to just be Cindy and not part of a mass. Now, there was something that was really important that I wanted to say about communitarianism. It springs from Fabianism. For those groping around sort of going, oh, is it communism? What exactly is it? Is it just another term for communism? No, it's not just another term for communism. It's more than that. It's communitarianism, I'm sorry. And if you want to trace back its roots, its roots really are Fabianism. And what are the principles of Fabianism? And they are collectivist. But it's not grassroots collectivists. It's not like me and you, Temora, and the real people grassroots who we're going to own our factory and we're going to own our waterway. No, the community is the government and the corporations that are ultimately a conglomerate of corporations. That's the community. And wherever you see community being sort of drilled into your head, they are appealing to our sense of wanting a community, needing a community. But that is not what we're going to get, unfortunately.
Well, Cindy, thank you. I've asked you to traverse some considerable territory there, and you've done it with aplomb, as always. I really feel that I hope that it's something, a conversation that people do feel that they can share with people who haven't heard about what's going on before, and that it will affect some sort of linking of knowledge and understanding and perception of things that they've actually seen and know to be true, with things that haven't, that they've seen, but that appear to be out of context, or that don't have any context. Hopefully now they have some context. So thank you very much, and we'll leave it there, because I don't want to ruin it. Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.